Before we get into today's article, I want to take a moment to explain why I've continued talking about this situation. First, I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to watch this series, review documents, and engage in thoughtful conversation. This is the final installment of my Performative Allyship Series. When I started this series, it was never about reliving the past. This series has always been about documenting my lived experiences, responding to public statements that were made about me, and walking through the publicly available documents, correspondence, and media reports that shaped those experiences. More importantly, it's been about asking a much bigger question. What happens when the organizations and individuals we trust to advocate for children lose the trust of the communities they serve? Throughout this series, I haven't asked you to simply take my word for anything. Whenever possible, I've shown you the public records, correspondence, media reports, and other available documents so you can review the information for yourself and draw your own conclusions. Whether you ultimately agree with every conclusion I've reached or not, I hope this series encourages all of us to ask better questions, expect greater transparency, and remember that accountability should never depend on who is asking for it. Although this is the final episode of the series, I don't believe the conversation ends here. In fact, I believe this conversation is just beginning. Over the past 2 years, I've come to believe that the issues raised through my experiences extend beyond one school, one community, or one PTA. They raise broader questions about nonprofit governance, transparency, accountability, and public trust. Because of that, I've created a new change.org petition calling on the New Jersey PTA to adopt stronger governance, transparency, and accountability practices that can help strengthen trust and better protect local school communities throughout our state. I'll tell you more about that petition at the end of this video, and I hope you'll stay to learn why I believe these reforms matter. Now, with that said, let's take a look at this final article in the series. This final article about the Glenfield PTA, dated November 1st, 2024, was entitled, "Under NJPTA's Watchful Eye, Montclair's Glenfield PTA Picks New Leaders." As you can see in this photo, here is Nancy Wallace from the NJPTA, and this is Jeremy Fowatana. This is the individual that I mentioned before that was allegedly banned from another school's PTA a few years prior. On Wednesday, October 30th, 2024, at the direction of NJPTA's president, Sharon Roseborough, and with the assistance of Glenfield Middle School's interim principal, Marcos Vargas, the NJPTA team came to Montclair to conduct what I believe was an unethical and illegal PTA board election. Using a run-from-the-floor ballot, those in attendance voted in a new PTA president, this man, Jeremy Fowatana. The individual, like I just mentioned, was allegedly banned from another school's PTA a few years prior. They also voted in a new vice president. Her name was Julia Savoca, and a treasurer, Jared Miller, and a secretary, Betty Schvetz. And you guys have heard that one name throughout this entire series. And you could go back and see why that name has been mentioned throughout this series. As I have discussed previously, there were allegations that the intent was for Black members to have no role on the Glenfield PTA's executive board. And while I'm not stating those allegations as fact, let's be clear, the outcome was exactly that. There were no Black individuals serving as president, vice president, secretary, or treasurer. Of course, I did not attend this October 30th, 2024 election. Neither did the other members of my board. Why would we want to continue serving in that type of environment? If this was the community that was going to show up to meetings, there was absolutely no reason for us to stay involved. And although Sharon Roseborough, NJPTA's president, did not personally attend the October 30th meeting, it was my understanding that NJPTA's involvement was carried out under her direction. And now here's something I really want people to pay attention to. NJPTA has no legal authority over local PTAs, including the Glenfield PTA. Yet for months leading up to this election, Sharon Roseborough publicly told members of the Montclair community that NJPTA did have that authority. She also repeatedly stated that I had been president for 2 years, which was false. And honestly, why wouldn't people believe her? She was the president of the NJPTA. So then you have to ask yourself, why tell the public something that wasn't true? In my opinion, the answer was money. The controversy surrounding Glenfield dramatically increased PTA membership, and you have to pay for those PTA memberships. NJPTA receives a portion of those membership dues. The more memberships sold, the more revenue NJPTA receives from the Glenfield community. To take it one step further, Sharon Roseborough was fully aware of the state documents showing that I had not been president for 2 years. Now, here's something that many people don't know. This is an email confirming a phone call between me and National PTA President Yvonne Johnson. That call took place on October 18th, 2024, nearly 2 weeks before the October 30th Glenfield PTA election. I'm showing you this email simply to establish that this conversation happened on the date that I'm referencing. During that call, Ms. Johnson acknowledged that she was aware that I had only served as Glenfield PTA president for 1 year and not 2. In other words, she was fully aware that the public statements about my tenure were inaccurate. She also told me that she believed Sharon Roseborough's involvement in the Glenfield PTA matter was wrong. However, she explained that because people appeared to be attacking my leadership, Sharon was trying to protect the NJPTA's brand by giving those individuals what they wanted. And let's be clear, the people did not make up the majority of the Glenfield school community. Ms. Johnson explained that there was nothing the National PTA could do because the National PTA had no authority over the New Jersey PTA. And let's think about that for a moment. The National PTA acknowledged that it had no authority over the NJPTA. Then in 2025, NJPTA's own attorney acknowledged that NJPTA had no authority over the Glenfield PTA. None. It's the same governance principle. Each organization has legal boundaries. So my question is this: if leadership understood where those boundaries existed, why weren't those boundaries respected at Glenfield? That's a question I still believe deserves an answer. The irony surrounding Jeremy becoming PTA president is this. When I served as vice president in 2022, we were instructed specifically not to allow Jeremy to participate in certain activities because he had allegedly been asked to stay away from families at another elementary school in the district. According to individuals familiar with that situation, there had allegedly been several uncomfortable encounters that ultimately resulted in him being banned from one of the elementary school's PTAs. Some people know exactly what school it is. I'm not going to point it out, but if you know, you know. If those individuals witnessed what they say that they witnessed, I believe it would have been important for them to publicly share those concerns. But to each their own. I truly meant it when I said I was finished trying to serve on the Glenfield PTA. I accomplished everything I set out to accomplish, and I'm incredibly proud of what my teams achieved. The people who wanted black leadership removed attempted to recreate what we had already built, and they never could. In the end, what was truly exposed was the alleged bigotry behind what happened. Somewhere down in this article, you'll see where Matt Kadash states that the local had no credible evidence to support Thompson's statements. But the public document showing that I served as vice president, not president, was available for anybody to review. So my question is simple. How does an award-winning reporter overlook a public document? And when I see situations like this where people claim they didn't know the facts, even though those facts were publicly available, it reminds me of how often history has shown that inconvenient facts are ignored when they don't fit a preferred narrative, especially when that narrative involves black people. Now, some people may point out that Marlena Sims Powell and Christina Joseph Robinson, people who have made comments to the Montclair Local, are black women who supported what ultimately became an all-white executive board. And that's where I think about moments throughout history when some people choose to support systems that ultimately worked against people who looked like them. So, are they proud of supporting something that allegedly resulted in black people being excluded from executive leadership? Are they proud of ignoring public documents that contradicted what the public was being told? Only they can answer those questions. Personally, it would not surprise me if they continued defending those decisions. This Schvetz person is quoted in the article saying, "I'm doing this for the kids." As I've shared before, this is the same individual who previously attacked both my blackness and my position within the PTA. I've also discussed the allegations that she helped spearhead the effort that ultimately resulted in an all-white executive board. And while I cannot state those allegations as fact, that was ultimately the outcome. One of the newly elected board members was Jared Miller, who described himself as trustworthy and noted that he also served as treasurer for the Montclair Library Foundation. Personally, I don't place my trust in people who ignore publicly available information or who support an agenda that allegedly resulted in the exclusion of black people from leadership. That isn't someone I want serving on my board. Perhaps others feel differently. I think one of the biggest bombshells came in 2025 when NJPTA's own attorney admitted that NJPTA had no authority over the Glenfield PTA. Attorney Alicia D. Washington clearly stated that the Glenfield PTA is a separate legal entity and that matters involving that organization must be addressed directly with Glenfield or its legal counsel. That admission directly contradicts NJPTA's involvement in Glenfield's 2024 meetings and business dealings. To me, that's an incredibly important fact because it raises an obvious question. If they knew they lacked legal authority, why did they tell the public otherwise? In my opinion, they had no legal authority to involve themselves in an agenda that allegedly resulted in the exclusion of black people from executive leadership. Anyone who supported that should seriously reflect on the role they played. What was ultimately taken from the children and the families and the entire community wasn't just stability, it was trust. And perhaps the greatest outcome of all of this was exposure. Exposure of racism, exposure of bias, and exposure of who people truly were when leadership mattered most. I don't believe anyone runs a PTA perfectly. People move away, people resign, people burn out, life happens, people don't understand everything the same way. But leadership is about intent. If I make a mistake or if you make a mistake, what's wrong with helping each other? This wasn't someone saying, "Hey D, let me help you out." It wasn't mentorship, it wasn't guidance based on everything I experienced, it was exactly what it appeared to be: bias. When there was a white man serving as PTA president, very few people questioned his leadership. His leadership was just accepted. But when I became an extremely successful black leader within the same organization, suddenly my leadership became the issue. Given the social climate we've seen across this country, can we honestly say we're surprised at all? As I mentioned in my previous video, since 2024, I've continued hearing from community members, both in Montclair and beyond, whose experiences appear to reflect what can happen when concerns about the exclusion of black leadership are left unaddressed. Excluding black voices from leadership sends a message, and messages like that have lasting consequences. This article describes NJPTA as New Jersey's largest nonprofit grassroots children's advocacy association. But what happens when an organization that claims to advocate for children and families publicly supports an agenda that appears to discourage exactly that? What happens when that same organization publicly provides false information and later acknowledges that information was inaccurate? Trust is broken. The NJPTA website currently lists Sharon Roseborough as a member at large under federal regulation. In my opinion, anyone who participated in the 2024 Glenfield PTA business dealings on behalf of NJPTA should step down. If your own attorney acknowledges you had no legal authority to interfere, it's difficult to ask the public to simply trust your leadership moving forward. As a community advocate, I have a simple call to action. I encourage everyone to contact NJPTA and ask 2 questions. First, what steps are being taken to ensure NJPTA leadership does not intentionally misinform the public again? Second, what safeguards are being put in place to ensure NJPTA does not involve itself in personal agendas at the local PTA level, particularly those that could create biased or exclusionary environments? Finally, if you believe organizations should be transparent, accountable, and truthful with the communities they serve, I created a change.org petition asking NJPTA to adopt explicit language that helps prevent situations like this from happening again. If you agree, I hope you take a moment to read it, sign it, and share it.